Is your gauge cluster a tangled mess of wires? Are your light bulbs constantly burning out, or are you constantly blowing fuses? Is your wiring old and brittle and falling apart? Well, friend, you've come to the right place. You've got essentially 7 wires. You've got the left turn signal and the right turn signal. You've got your high beam indicator, and then you've got a pink wire that gives power to your gauges. It splits off to your fuel gauge and your temp gauge. And you've got a ground wire. You've got your fuel gauge wire that basically works off of a resistor that's inside your gas tank on your sending unit. The terminal that's to the passenger side of the temp gauge goes to your sending unit that's in your engine block if you've got one of those electrical sending units. And then you've got your dash lights, and there's 3 different dash lights that you need to run one wire and split it off 3 different ways. And you've got the wiring for your ammeter gauge. You have 4 prongs, 2 on the D side of the gauge. You've got 2 for the C side. On the D side, or the discharge side, you're only going to use 1 of the prongs, and that wire is going to go to the battery terminal on your starter. On the C side of the gauge, you're going to use both prongs, and one is going to go to your light switch battery, and the other is going to go to your ignition switch battery terminal. But if you're hot rodding your car like I am, the ammeter gauge probably won't work for you anyways, especially if you upgrade your engine and you're using a different alternator versus the generator, because they had voltage regulators that somehow got into the mix. Even the horn relay somehow got in there at some point. I'm running the Sniper EFI system anyways, and on the little display for the Sniper system, it shows my battery voltage, so I'm not going to use the ammeter gauge. But that's how you wire it up if you are restoring one of these trucks. Over the years, and this wire being moved around and the gauge being pulled in and out, the housing on these wires gets really brittle, and the plastic actually breaks and makes a weak point. In my younger, dumber years, I spliced the wire to the little wire sticking out the back of these original bulb sockets. Inside these factory bulb sockets, the wires had these little brass contacts crimped on, and it's meant to hold the wire in there, and it's spring-loaded. So when you put your light bulb in there, the end of the light bulb makes contact with that brass piece, which gets the power from the wire. I looked up online trying to find those little brass fittings, and I couldn't find them anywhere. So I have a solution for that. If you go to the hardware store, pick up yourself some of these rivets. So these are 1/8-inch steel rivets, but they have the copper-plated head on them, and copper conducts electricity a lot better than steel does. And you could solder it if you want to. All you got to do is stick them in like some vice grips or something and just give them a little tap, and the steel part of the rivet will pop out. And then you can use the copper piece to crimp it onto your wire. And that's going to make a really great connection for that electricity to go through the wire into your light bulb. So we'll just remove the wiring by cutting it and then pushing it through. And we'll feed the new wire through the socket. Then after you strip it, you're going to put the little copper rivet piece on there, and then you can crimp it onto the wire. And there you go. Now you can choose to solder this on if you want to, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna leave it crimped the way it is, because as you can see, it's got a hold of it. And now you've got brand new wiring on your original factory bulb socket. So we'll just repeat this process for all the other bulb sockets. We'll have all brand new wiring in our old 1958 gauge cluster. So the whole idea I'm going for here is to keep the back of this cluster clean. So I want to route the wires all the same direction, leaving a little slack so there's no tension here, and then come through this little bracket guy right here, and then out to the harness. I need to turn these 3 wires for the lights right here into 1 wire. There's multiple ways to do it. You could use these splice connector deals that are meant to tap into 1 wire. I'm not going to use these. What I'm going to do instead is solder these wires together. I just had this little tiny section of the dash light wire left, and this is what I want to go into that harness pack. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe somewhere right in this section right here, kind of merge them all into one before this clip right here, so there's not too much going through this guy. Now here's the trick to soldering. You gotta have clean hands. Don't do this with dirty hands because inevitably you're going to get dirt in there, and then that's when it gets really frustrating because your solder won't stick. My hands are kind of permanently stained, so you'll have to take my word for it that I did just wash my hands, I promise you. So now before I plug my solder gun in, I want to kind of clean the tip. Let's see, do I have any new sandpaper? I don't think I do, so use clean sandpaper, but I'm going to use the cleanest bit I got right here. Just kind of getting all that gunk off of there. Of course, now my hands are dirty again, so I'm gonna have to go wash again. Plug this bad boy in, let it get hot, then I'll go wash my hands while it's getting hot. Be right back. While it's getting hot, let's talk about the solder I'm gonna use. So you wanna find the stuff that's specifically for electrical connections. The other thing I like to do is add some of this tinning flux. Now, this you can get from any hardware store in the plumbing section. Many, many years ago, I used to be a plumber until I realized I wasn't cut out to be a poop mechanic. One of the laws of plumbing is solder flows where flux goes. So just to kind of help the solder go where I want it to go, I'm gonna put some of this tinning flux on the wires. I don't want to do all three of these in the same spot because that'll just get really bulky in one place. So I'm going to stagger it. I'm going to solder one a little bit shorter and then go down the line and solder another one and then go down the line a little farther and I'll tap into our gray wire. And when you heat this, heat the bottom side of it because you want to heat the wire, not the solder. And you can see where the solder is flowing into our joint here. And just kind of keep it on there until it looks like it's all covered. That wire is fused together and we're not going to have any problems with it. Now I got to do all the rest of them. So I'm putting multiple layers of heat shrink on here because if you put heat shrink that fits the three wires together, it's going to be too loose on that one wire. So I'm just kind of stepping it up as I go, getting a little bit bigger each time. And then the last step is to get the one that fits over all three wires and make it long enough to cover the whole entire thing. And there we go. We've got three light wires going into one wire that's going to go into the harness pack. Now I have to do power and ground and the gas sender. I'm not going to be running the temp gauge. Temp gauge doesn't work anyways. I have the temp gauge on the screen for the sniper system. So I'm just not going to run the power to that. But if you were doing this at home and you wanted to, you'd have to do the same thing where you're splicing your pink power wire to your temp gauge and to your fuel gauge. Since I'm only running the fuel gauge on this cluster, I just need one lowly pink wire. That's it. And then I also need the brown fuel sender wire as well. And then for the ground, here's my theory with grounds. The more the merrier. So I'm actually going to do two ground wires connecting to both sides of this gauge cluster. So this side will be grounded and this side will be grounded. That's kind of how I had it run before, but I use these kind of janky connectors. So if this didn't have a shield, it just has to touch metal, and for a ground, it's perfectly acceptable. All right, and this fuel gauge just has two posts, and so I need to get some of those eyelet deals for this. I have one that's the heat shield kind, and then I have one of the old school janky kind. But what I'm going to do is put this one on the tan wire, since the pink wire is your ignition power source. So all our wires on the gauges are run and they're all loomed together nice and neat. So now we can put on our weather pack connections. These four wires are for all the lights, so I'll put them together in one connector. And then the power, the ground, and the fuel sender wire I'll put into another connector. I left these three wires a little longer so I can stagger the connectors. That way the loom under the dash doesn't get too bulky. I'm going to be using Eastwood's Crimp-Right kit. Now this kit is awesome. It comes with the crimping tool, it comes with a whole bunch of different size little connectors and rubber pieces, and you can buy more if you need more later on. But I've discovered a couple of tricks to using this kit that aren't in the instructions, and I'm going to pass them on to you today only, absolutely free. So if you look at the connector, there's two different sets of prongs. The ones in the back actually holds the rubber piece and the wire housing, and these three little guys here in the middle is what's actually going to crimp onto your wire itself. So first things first, we'll slide the rubber on there, and if you soak them with your spit, it'll give it enough lubricant to kind of work itself on there. And then you can see we only need about 1/4 of an inch wire exposed, so we'll just strip the housing off a little bit, give it a little twist, and then we'll slide our rubber piece up almost all the way to the end. I like to just leave a little bit, and then put your connector on here. You can see how it's kind of on the rubber piece here. So what I like to do is to take my needle nose pliers and kind of bend these tabs over just a little bit over that rubber piece, because that's going to help hold it in place when you put it in your crimping tool. It's not going to move around on you. So once you got it kind of in this position, then we'll put in our crimping tool. Now make sure you put it in the right size, and you can also lube these teeth up a little bit if you want to as well. I use some dielectric grease. And then you want to position it so all the teeth are pointing down into the tooth that has the numbers and stuff on it. And you can see kind of where it's at. You want to make sure that it's pointing straight up and down. And those little tabs on the end can rest up against the side of the teeth. And then once you feel like you got it in place, you just kind of crimp down on it until it stops clicking. Slowly work it out, and there you go. Perfect crimp. So we just got to repeat this process for every wire, and then we'll stick it in the housing. Alright, so now we got all 4 on here, so now we need to get them in the connector in the right order. So I got my little cheat sheet here, and you notice it says A, B, C, and D. It actually says A, B, C, and D across the bottom down here. So you just line this up. There we go, boom! B is dark blue, and you'll feel it click in place. Boom, just like that. And just clamp it down like so. Keep everything nice and neat. And look at that. I mean, I'm no professional, but I think that looks pretty good. Now we just need to put it in the truck. Well, I hope this helped you out. If it did, give it a big old thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe down in the corner down there by clicking the button, and comment, share with your friends, etc. I'll see you next time.